Today we're going to learn how to populate an intermediate tooling library with a Toolblock. And this particular one is going to concentrate on the single turn toolblocks, so the kind that you put a boring bar into with a collet here. And you also notice that the hole does go through, so we'll talk about how we could have that boring bar stick out of the front or the back. Okay. Also, one other thing, I'm using a standard 3-axis vertical mill straight out of the standard machine list you get when you install GibbsCAM. You can also do it with a lathe or other types of machines, but in this particular instance, I'm choosing to do it with a 3-axis vertical mill. So let's go ahead and get started. One of the things you have to do is you'll notice that I have in a 3-axis vertical mill just the XY plane. It's the standard XY plane. That's the only coordinate system I have right now. What we want to do is to first get this block oriented and positioned correctly so that the block is pointing down in the Z direction here in my XZ plane. Okay, so that's step number one. So what I'm going to do is, and this is not a coordinate system or a geometry transformation exercise. So if you're not familiar with this, there are other resources that you can tap on for creating coordinate systems and or moving solid geometry around. But I will go ahead and explain this as I go along. So the first thing I need to do is change the orientation of this thing. So what I'm going to do is turn on my face selection, and I'm going to pick this, and I'm going to pick the option that says align face to CS. Okay, so you can see that it's kind of popped it forward here. Also, one other thing I want to point out is that there is this little ledge here. Okay, so this would be what I'm going to call the front, because this will kind of snap onto the front of the turret when I'm going to go ahead and do that. Okay. You'll notice I picked this face and not this face. That's because this is going to insert into the turret. So this is a slot that will insert into it. So my zero plane is actually this face right here. So I purposely chose that face. Okay. What I'm going to do now is I want to get my attachment point to the turret, and I want it to be right in the center of this block. Now, you may choose to do other things, but this is the way we're going to do it for this exercise. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my edge selection. And there's more than one way to do this, but I'm going to pick a couple of edges here and extract them. And I'm doing that mainly just to get 2 points, namely these 2 points right here. And I'm going to do a little geometry creation, a line between 2 points. And then I'm going to connect this line up. Again, not a geometry exercise, but I'm going to go ahead now and split this using the GeoSplit plugin right down the middle. I did all that just to get this middle point here. You may have a different methodology that you may want to use to do all this, which is fine. Right? So now that I have that done, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this, and I'm going to say, let's move it. I'm going to use the absolute translate function. And I'm going to say I want to move it from this point. I'm using a Shift Alt to fill the from position, so you can see it's got all this. And then I just want to go to 0, 0, 0, right? I'm moving this whole thing there. So let's go ahead and hit do it. And now we should be centered. I don't need this point anymore. Right where I need to be. I have my orientation correct. And again, to review, this X should be pointing towards the front. Okay, which I'm calling this the front. This will attach to the turret, and your Z should be pointing straight down. Okay. All right. So now that I have that established, what we want to do is establish our tool attachment points. Right? So that's, in this particular case, I actually want two. I want one for a boring bar that has a front orientation, and then I want one for a boring bar that has a back orientation. So I'm going to go ahead and do both of those, and I have to create coordinate systems to do that. Okay? So I'm going to say, let's go ahead and make a new coordinate system, and I'm going to call it tool position front. Okay? And now I can start to modify that accordingly. Now, one of the things I also want is I want to get a point at the center of this that I can use as the origin. So I'm going to turn on my edge selection once again and extract those edges once more. And then I go ahead and get a point at the center of that circle. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and get rid of that. That's all I really wanted was that point. All right. So for the orientation, what we want is we want the D of our coordinate system, that is the depth, to be pointing inwards, and we want the H component to be pointing down, so that it's consistent when we have a boring bar. As we're going to see later on when we test this, we can have a boring bar position up and down. So in order to maintain that consistency, we want to follow those rules. Okay? So again, no particular order, but what I'm going to do is turn on my face selection, and I'm going to go ahead and right click on here and say I'm going to use the alt plane through and move. Okay? And what you can see is that it's down here. Okay? Oh, one other thing, I'm sorry, before I do that, I want to make sure that I make this belong to this coordinate system 1. The reason for that is when I start to move this this coordinate system around, I don't want this point to move. So let's do that one more time. I'm going to pick this and right click and say align plane through and move. You see my point did not move that time. Okay, and then what I want to do is pick this point and change the origin to there. And voila, I believe we have what we want. We have the H component, which is the Z in this particular case, of a right-handed coordinate system, pointing down towards the mounting point, and the D pointing in towards the center of this. So we have our first coordinate system made here, right? Let's do something similar to get the other side. So again, I'm going to turn on my edge selection, extract this. And let's go ahead and get the center point of that. And I can get rid of that circle now. Once more, I am going to make this belong to the XY plane without moving it. So it does not move when I start to create another coordinate system. So I've got this. Now I'm going to create a new coordinate system, and I'll call it tool position back. Okay. So we've got that established. And actually, remember I said I want the D to be pointing inwards. Okay, so what I can do is just hit this. That will switch my D so it's pointing in. Now what I want is I want to change the origin to here, so I'm going to pick that point I just made and move the coordinate system. Okay, so we are getting there, but our H component here is, it's not pointing down, is it? Okay, so one way I can do this is the align H-axis function. Tell it to swing around 180 degrees. Okay, so now if all my logic is correct, right, my D is pointing in, my H component is pointing down on both of these coordinate systems. and we've already established the position of the solid to the mounting point. So we've got everything ready here at this point. So we should be ready to go ahead and add this to the library. Now when you do this, when you add to a library, you can't have multiple tool blocks in a single block. You've got to have only one at a time. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go to File and then Tool Block Library, because this is our tool block. Now you notice I already have one established called BMT Tool Blocks, and that's what this is from BMT. But if I didn't, and this is my first time, I'd simply hit Create here and then give it a name and then follow the procedure that you're about to see right here. Okay, so I'm going to just go ahead and use this existing library and say Edit Library. And you'll notice that by default, it goes ahead and gives it the name of the VNC file that you're in. So it's single turn with 32mm hole. Okay, but we have to give it some information. We have to start populating this. What I'm going to do first is I'm going to turn off my face selection and pick the whole solid. Right click on the root, add child, and a simulation body. Now it'll give it the same name it has. Now and give this solid the name single turn with 32mm hole, so it matches the VNC, but it might be a completely different name. Okay, so you probably want to go ahead and name this to what you want it to be here, just so that you don't have to override it and everything matches. You notice I have the applied selected button checked on as well. Okay, so I do that and it kind of gives me a little thumbnail sketch of what that's about. Okay, I'm going to activate coordinate system number 2, and what I'm going to do now is say I'm going to add a child, and it's called a receptor, and I'm going to give it the same name I gave it here. I'm going to say a tool position front. And then if I could go on and do all the orientations here manually and everything, but one thing that, as long as I've activated this, it's real simple to do, is to just say from current CS, and it fills everything in for you, so you don't have to worry about it. Okay. In the same sort of way, I'm going to go ahead and move this over a little bit so we can see both. And I'm going to activate tool position back. Okay. And now what I'm going to do is add one more receptor, and as you may have guessed, I'm going to call it tool position back. Hit OK to that. And again, since I've activated this, I can just go from current CS, and it'll fill in everything for me. Okay, so that's the main steps to get things ready. Now, these are optional steps, but I kind of like to do them where you can go and say you can categorize it. So I'm going to say, hey, this is used in turning, and drills can go in here, and boring bars can go in here. Not cutoffs, not right angle heads, and not live tooling. Then for a type, I'm going to say this is for turrets. This is a turret type tool block. And then also what I can do is I can measure some things. So, you know, I happen to know that this one is 70. This is in millimeters, by the way, 75 millimeters wide and 93 millimeters tall. Now, you don't need to put this information in, but it's just kind of a reference when somebody brings it in case they're wondering, well, I wonder how big this is. This gives them some frame of reference. Okay. One last thing I want to do before I add this to the library is to go to the Setup Offsets area and click on the X box. What this means is when I use it, I want the option of being able to adjust it in the X direction. In this particular case, I don't care so much about the Z or the Y, which is why I'm not going to check them on. But if I did, I would check those on to have the option to move them in that direction as well. Okay, so now everything's set up. I'm going to go ahead and add it to the library by hitting the Add button. It will go through some graphic gyrations here. when it's done, it's now added to the library. What I can do now is to go ahead and test this out. So I'm going to go to another file that I've set up for testing. And one of the things you want to do first of all is go to File and Machine Data. So I'm using a particular machine, a Hyundai Wia SE2200 LSY, but whatever machine you're in, you have to modify its MDD file, the machine definition document, so that it recognizes where this library is. So I'm going to hit Edit here, and you'll notice it brings up a box with lots of things. In this particular case for tool blocks, what's important is that I only have one tool group here, but that I say use tool blocks, and that you'll notice it says turret and there's 12 stations. Doesn't hurt to turn on the use multi-position tool blocks either. And make sure that you leave your options open in case there are multi-position tool blocks available. Then over here you'll notice it says tool position 1 allows any tool block, right? And I have 12 of these, but all 12 of these have been set up to accept any kind of tool block, okay? You'll also notice down here that BMT tool blocks is checked on for any station that I check here, okay? So if I want to have full access to that, you have to go ahead and do that. Make sure that this section and this section and this section here are all filled out correctly. Then you want to go ahead and save the changes at that point and go ahead and close out of this. So what I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to go ahead and test this out. And I have a drill established here, but actually I'm going to try it with this boring bar. Now the reason I'm doing this is because I want to test the orientation, whereas if I do a drill it doesn't really matter, you know, on the up and down. We'll see here in a minute what I mean. So I'm going to click that little blue icon here, and I'm going to pick a single turn here, okay, and it fills in everything. One other thing too I should have pointed out is that I clicked on the offset X. That'll allow me to shift it along this axis in case I want to move it back and forth here a little bit, okay? So keep that in mind that I did that, but you see all the other information I had is here as well, okay? Let's jump out of this a second since I've added this, because now you see our graphics have changed. And this is what I want to check. I want to check to make sure that, you know, when I say the orientation is up, it's up, and when it's down, it's down. You also notice it took away some of the other orientation options that I have, right? Because the turret block is restricting the choices that you have here, okay? So notice that we have it up, and also we notice that we have here, it's very familiar, we have tool position back or front, because remember we made that. I'm going to pick front first, and let's go back in and check this out. Okay, so it shows us here kind of a preview. What I'm going to do, what I can do also is this particular machine has a turret. Okay, so if you have a turret established, it's kind of nice to do this. Say preview the tool group. Remember that we are number 5. Okay, so so when it swings down, it's going to roughly have this orientation, and it should look like it's up, which indeed it does, right? Let's jump out, and let's change the orientation to down. Again, we're just checking some things out. Preview the tool group again, and now we can see that it's switched to down, okay? You notice it's centered in that hole as well. Now, this D value in a situation like this will be the stick out length on the first page. So you notice the stick out length is set to 4. If I set this to 0, okay, you're going to go and see that this is now just right at the front of it. It's not sticking out at all. So if you want it to stick out a certain distance, you can either put it in here, which will then populate your stick out length, or you can go to the first page and do it there as well. Okay, so we previewed our tool group. It all looks good. That's facing down. Suppose I want it facing backwards now. Okay, what I can do is go to my tool position, and let's go to back. You notice the graphics change. So we have an up orientation and a down. We'll test the up first, since that's what it gave us first. Again, preview the tool group. Now you'll notice it's sticking backwards, and the orientation is up right now, right? Which is correct. Now I'm going to pick this for down. And again, preview the tool group to test this out. Good, it's sticking down. And now, you know, you can continue to play with this in terms of your stick out length. If you wanted to shift to the left or the right, you can play with the V value. And if you want to move the other direction, you can play with the H value. And that'll move it up and down like this. But, you know, for something like this, being centered is what you want as well. Obviously, you'd have a column in there. And you could go to the trouble of doing that as well with some more intermediate tooling. But in general, those aren't going to collide with anything that you're interested in. So you can choose to do that or not. But this is how we would do it. Now, one other thing I should point out is, let's hop out of this and let's go into Machine Sim. And we have a Hyundai Wia machine here in this particular case that we're going to use. But the principle is the same no matter what you're going to do. So I'm going to just I'm going to get rid of some of the components on here just so that it's a little bit easier to see in and do some measuring is what we're going to do here. So, okay. All right, maybe a few more here. Again, I'm just clearing some space out because I want to make it easy to kind of rotate around and look at stuff here. Okay. So remember, we're on station 5 here, which is right like this. Okay. So on this turret, each one was done. You'll notice some of these we don't have tool blocks on yet, like tool block 4. You know, we can populate that later. But the entry, the mounting point is like right here in the center, okay, for each station, okay? So it really doesn't have a frame of reference for where this thing is, okay? So that may be fine. I mean, you're going to zero the tool anyway, but let's suppose that I wanted this little ledge like right up against the turret. Well, you can actually measure. I'm going to use my tool plugins show position. And I'm going to use it in the position mode. Notice I have my face selection on even though we actually won't see it, okay? And I'm going to just click around here. You notice one value has remained the same, which is this 2.577, right? So I'm going to put that in here, 2.577, okay? Now what I want to do is I want to kind of swing this around and just see what the H value of this is, and it's 2.813, right? So I'll go minus 2.813. So the difference in this, and this is in inches, is minus 0.236. Okay, so let's just kind of keep that in mind for now. That's what I'm going to do is jump out of Machine Sim, and let's jump back in to here. And again, what if I wanted that nice and flush up against there? Okay, so I'm going to put in, by the way, in this example, this is an inch example. Even these are metric tool blocks. Okay, so keep that in mind, but I want to put in that value directly. I actually could have copied it, I guess, from, I could have copied and pasted it which I probably should have done. But let me just put this in real quick. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. That's the wrong value. My fault. The one I wanted to put it in is right here. Remember I talked about moving the block along here. So I'll say minus 0.236. Okay. Let's preview the tool group and let's see if we can see that just visually here on station 5. Okay. So I think you kind of can, if I just do this, that the edge of this is like right up against the front of the turret now. Okay, so I've moved it back that distance. So you do have the ability to move these blocks back and forth as long as you've opened that up. Now, in this particular case, I only opened up the offset X value. But I could have opened up Y and Z. I just didn't see any reason why anyone would want to move it in those other directions. But you certainly have the flexibility to do that as well. Okay, so now that I have that done, I could go on. For instance, we noticed in station 4 did not have, that was not populated, right? So I could go ahead and use this in station 4 at this point as well, if I like. And for this one, I believe that we want it facing to the left, right? So I'm going to tell a tool position front, okay? And again, let's do this. Let's preview the tool group. And now we can see in station 4, we've populated this. So in station 5, we have it pointing backwards. Station 4, we have it pointing forward, okay? So a lot of flexibility here in how you can define it. And then once you define it, how you can use it and have multiple tool mounting points depending on what your application is. So that's the end of this demonstration. Thank you very much.